Okay, so for those of you who have not met me yet, my name is Kamiron Freeman, and I'm somewhat of a philosopher, spiritual scientist, inventor, and probably many other things as well. But I've been working on this idea for MetaGaius and its organizational system and other projects that go into it for going on 6, 7 years now. And so this is the second presentation that we're going to be doing. I did a more thorough introduction of myself in the first presentation, which you can most certainly see when you watch that. So I'll keep my introduction here pretty brief this time with just that. I'm from Granby, Connecticut, but right now I'm actually down in Texas, in Austin right now. Came down to Houston on an invite with Andrew Pham, who's one of the core foundational members, who's working on co-creating this with me. A lot of the information that we're going to go over tonight is a direct result of this collaboration with Andrew. It's evolved a lot since I started working with him, and it's only continuing to evolve now that I've gotten down here to Texas in person with these people. The energy dynamics is taking things to a whole new level. Things are starting to go really fast now. We even potentially have a cryptocurrency bank that may very well be becoming our central banking system for this alternative society, which will eventually help to create a free access economy for ourselves in the future that allows us to continue doing business with the rest of the world, but creating that much more freedom for ourselves. I don't want to say too much about that yet because things really set in stone, but I have met with them and they're interested in collaborating, and we're going to see how things go from there. So with that, I'm going to start sharing my screen and get into the presentation. Okie dokie. Slideshow. Current slide. Okay. So the rules and engagement for today. Last time I did this presentation, I basically stopped every now and then to ask questions, and we will have a question and answer session towards the end of this presentation. But that said, I want to make sure that everybody is going to understand this content as we go. And it's very new, it's very different. It may be very unusual for many people. So to make sure that you're understanding, I want you, like, if you're not understanding something, you have a question, just interrupt me, all right, and ask your question so that we can make sure that you're understanding before we continue on, okay? I want this to be kind of informal and conversational, right? The idea is, like, I just said that part. So, and I just said that part, and I said all this. Okay, we're going to move on to the next. Nothing that we're going to go over here is set in stone. In fact, nothing will ever be set in stone, right? Everything will always be subject to debate and vote for final approval. That's the way everything is being set up, right? Everyone is sovereign. There's going to be, people joining this community as time goes on, and I want everybody to, have access to their own personal power in the fact that they have the ability to change things as things go on, right? Everybody has the power to create a proposal, but all decisions are made through, a voting system. That we'll get into in more detail, but I just want everybody to know that what we're going over now is not set in stone. Things can and will change as they already have been over time. So first, one of the things I want to go over first in this presentation is why we chose the name Metagaius. So meta is a Greek term that means after, before, or beyond. Gaia is the Celtic name for the planet Earth, and ES is the pluralization of a word, right? So altogether, Metagaius directly translates as beyond the earth, or indirectly, therefore, translates as the heavens, right? It's a euphemism basically for the kingdom of heaven on earth. Numerologically, the word adds up to 36, and 3 plus 6 equals 9. And 3, 6, and 9 in vortex mathematics represents the polarity of the singularity, otherwise known as the Trinity. They are a direct reference to the 3 primordial laws of creation. The number 36 symbolizes creativity, kindness, humanitarianism, and helping others, right? Being of humanity and inclined towards helping to make the world a better place. The next thing I want to go over is the purpose statement for MetaGaius. So MetaGaius as a parallel global society is a free association of sovereign people working together in a spirit of harmony to maintain each other's freedom, equality, and sovereignty, while working to produce an abundance for each other in harmony with Mother Nature and in alignment with the natural laws of creation. Metagaius is the ongoing creation of society in the 4th density of consciousness and the polarity of compassion or service to others. For those who may not be familiar with this term 4th density, it basically means the same thing as the 5th dimension, right? People understand the 5th dimension of consciousness. People understand the 4th density of consciousness. Everybody's a little bit different. Metagaius is the present transition into and the future society of Earth in the new golden age of enlightenment. That's kind of a bold statement, but the way I see it, there's really only 2 ways to organize things: hierarchical and holographic, right? And I don't see too many other societies really nailing down the holographic way of organizing society in especially in the way nature actually works. And I think ultimately over time, all of these different alternative societies that are being co-created by other groups, and everybody's harmonized to their own thing, but ultimately over time, those are all going to merge into one overall global society in future. And maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong, but I think it's going to end up like everybody's going to start joining MetaGaius. Either that or just co-create into something else entirely in the future. In any case, to facilitate the unity of all groups, this is the actual purpose we're getting into, to facilitate the of all groups of people that are evolving into the transcendental state of consciousness, or the 4th density dimension, right? By providing the social organization and administrative system that such an evolved collective consciousness would operate as, to free ourselves from financial slavery and facilitate the human's natural inclination to create thrivably in harmony with nature and each other by creating a decentralized central banking system that allows us to live within a free access economy. To facilitate the opportunity. Oh, by the way, I'm in a hotel right now with the Wi-Fi here is sometimes a bit slow. If I cut out for long periods of time, can you let me know so I can repeat what I went over? And hopefully I won't get kicked off the internet, but I notice I have a slow connection right now. So please happens. All right, so to facilitate the global opportunity for more people to evolve to the 4th density collective consciousness, who otherwise wouldn't, because such a global option was never present for them to choose, by growing our society throughout the world as quickly and reasonably as possible. And by having a group, an entire sector of the councils, which we'll be going over later, dedicated to meditating and praying based on their belief structures for the success of MetaGaius and anchoring in higher frequencies of love, compassion, joy, peace, etc., which anyone can join as a minimum, which anyone can do to join as a minimum service to MetaGaius in order to participate in our free access economy, as it is also considered the highest form of service. That was a lot, so I'm just going to go over this in basic term one more time. Basically, We want to facilitate the evolution of humanity into the fourth density of consciousness. And that's basically one of the overarching purposes of MetaGaiaes, to help facilitate that evolution. And finally, to free ourselves from all other jurisdictions of man-made law by using natural laws, which we'll be going over later, and becoming sovereign members of MetaGaiaes, which gives us the ability to give ourselves diplomatic immunity, as that all figures of so-called authority know to respect out of fear of consequence. For those of you who aren't too familiar with these leanings, there are different types of sovereignty that you can get. And over the past 100 years or so of sovereignty becoming a thing, spreading throughout the mass consciousness, there have been many attempts that have failed and some that have succeeded. And those that have succeeded, many of them have eventually kind of been shot down in various ways. But the one that has never been shot down and the one that will always succeed is diplomatic immunity, right? This one particular term, every single figure of authority is familiar with. And by creating an alternative society in which every single member is sovereign and a diplomat, we can therefore give every single member a diplomatic immunity passports, which has no choice but to be respected by all these authority figures because they already have a fear of those very words. They see those words, they say, okay, I'm sorry, have a nice day. They don't go any farther. So with that, before we jump into the rest of this presentation, we only went over the metatocracy very briefly in the last video. I kind of had to cut it short because I had to move on with other things I had to do that evening. So I just kind of want to go over the metatocracy, the organizational structure, the mastermind once again, before we move on from it. So what is the metatocracy? It is the organizational structure of nature as can be seen throughout all of nature and understood through sacred geometry. It is a social administration system that enables an infinitely growing collective of individuals to rule over themselves and collectively manage organizations and society without violating anyone's fundamental rights to freedom, equality, and sovereignty as fractals of the unconsciousness, which can also be termed as representatives of God. And that's important for natural law purposes. There's a lot of courts who understand the principality of being representatives of God on earth. It is holographically organized anarchism. I don't know how that sits with everybody. Some people are all about anarchism, some people are not. In my own personal opinion, the way I see it, organization without anarchism, which is what we have now, is just as destructive as anarchism without organization, right? A lot of anarchists tend to think that, oh, you're not supposed to have any organizational systems, administration, no laws, no rules whatsoever. And that's actually wrong. That's just as much of a concoction for destruction as what we have today with governments and organizational systems in which anarchism does not exist, right? So here, what the metatocracy is holographically organized anarchism. So it's like a balance between the two. It's a three-dimensional system of orbitals rather than a two-dimensional pyramid power structure that gives everyone equality, freedom, and sovereignty, or power and authority, by creating spheres of influence called holospheres that decentralize power and authority through equal distribution. And finally, a system that is not the opposite of anything, but rather the balancing of all opposites. So this is the organizational structure in a nutshell, right? The amount of layers that listed here is like a galaxy, right? So it's based on the orbitals, based on the simplest version of this organizational structure throughout all of nature is the macro universe, right? You have moons that orbit planets, that orbit stars, that orbit galaxies, that orbit galactic clusters, that orbit the universe, right? So it's just this system of orbitals. And this here being a simplified depiction of that. the amount of layers here depicted are size of a galaxy. So at the center here, you have the galactic core, the entire huge circle here being the galaxy, right? Surrounding the galactic core are, the stars, right? At the center of each of these, being solar systems themselves, are those very same stars. So each of these circles here surrounding them are therefore the planets that orbit those stars. And then you zoom these out, right, into the next layer outward here. So these central circles inside here are the exact same thing as these system circles here, right? These groups here. And then surrounding these are now the planetary systems, right? So at the center, you have the planets, and surrounding them are the moons, right? So that's basically the structure itself in a nutshell. And this is essentially kind of look like if a corporation by today's standards were to reorganize into the metatocracy, the CEO being the center, their board of directors being the stars that surround them, zooming out to their holospheres, you have them at the center, and then you have, their various managers that surround them, and then these once again, and you would see more organization, right? So again, each of these circles is called a holosphere, which is a holographic sphere of influence. The smallest circles here represent individual people, right? So each of these little circles here represent individual people. The different colors represent the roles they play in the social administration of their mastermind, right? So each one of these colors, we're going to go over this in a minute, relates to a particular role in the mastermind, right? The larger circles surrounding each of these orbitals represent the sphere of influence or holosphere of the center of those orbitals. So as I just explained, this zooms out to here. This person is now this person in the center, and these are the people that surround them. Orbitals, a holosphere may also be a mastermind. So mastermind and holosphere are interchangeable terms. This is a multi-dimensional system in which everyone takes on multiple positions and roles simultaneously. And we'll go over how that works later on. Everyone's holosphere is called their garden, and everyone's role in the mastermind is called their field. So if you hear me use those terms, that's what I'm talking about. So, this person here, their garden would be their position as, the social media manager or the PR manager or the production manager. And the role, which we'll go over in a second, would be called their field. So mastermind your business is where we go over how this creates a holographic mastermind, right? First of all, a mastermind is not an individual, as many movies, Hollywood would like us to believe, but it's actually a group of people operating in harmony towards the achievement of the same goals. It was Napoleon Hill who first defined what a mastermind is, and he defined it as two or more people operating in harmony towards the achievement of the same goal, in which the total intelligence of the group becomes exponentially greater than the sum of the people in that group. And he didn't know that at the time, but there's actually a mathematical equation to tell you exactly how much intelligence is exponentially being produced by a group, right? So for example, at the top of every pyramid of every corporation is the board of directors, right? This board of directors is a mastermind. If masterminds are exponentially more effective than a single individual, then a business of holographically organized mass is exponentially more effective than a business with a single mastermind. Here's the mathematical equation, how this works, right? 1 equals 1 unit of intelligence on average. Therefore, 2 people equals double that, 2 units of intelligence on average. 3 people equals now 2 squared, right? So with 3 people, you start creating synergy. you start creating more output than you have as input, right? 3 squared equals 4. With 4 people, you get 2 cubed. That's 8 units of output. With 5 input, you get 2 to the 4th power. That's 16 output. You get to 7 people, which there's 7 roles. That's why I'm stopping there. That's actually that's a typo here. It's supposed to be 2 to the 6th power equals 64, right? So in a system of 7 masterminds, therefore, 1 mastermind equals 64 units of intelligence, right? If it has 7 people in it, right? So imagine if we had 7 masterminds all operating together here, right? It would equal 28. So 3 is now 128 squared, which is 16,384 units of output of intelligence. When we have 7 of these groups, like is depicted in one of these pictures here, that's 128 to the 6th power, which is over 4 trillion units of intelligence being produced by this group, right? And what it means is even if we're not operating at 100% efficiency, which we're bound not to, especially at first, even if we're operating only at 50% efficiency and there's a lot of friction in the group and, problems to overcome, we're still operating with over 2 trillion units of intelligence compared to a corporation with only, board of directors of 7 people operating at 64 units. That is out of this world, right? This is how the entire universe operates. This is how planetary systems, solar systems, galaxies produce more energy than, they actually take as input from the various celestial bodies that make up those galaxies, right? And we can tap into that by using this organizational structure. In Metatocracy, every individual manages themselves, right? And together they collectively manage their mastermind. Furthermore, every mastermind or group of orbitals manages itself and as its own administration, and together they all administrate the business, right? So finally, what that means is all the businesses using this very system administrate themselves, and also they administrate their local community, the great whole of society, right? And we're going to get into this later as to why and how that works. But first, we're going with mastermind roles. So these roles are based on the chakra system because as philosophically understand, the mind is actually the chakra system, right? Our neurology and our organ systems, our physiology essentially is a reflection of what is going on the spiritual side of things, right? The mind is the actual chakra system that is going on here. For the mastermind can also function off the same principle. Now, I noticed a slow connection, and it just said that I'm reconnecting. Have I been cutting out at all? Can somebody answer that for me?
You're kind of in and out a little bit, Cam. It's not, you can still distinguish the words in between.
Okay. Anybody not understanding what I'm saying as a result of this?
I'm getting most of it. Yeah, there are a little bit of cutting out, but I'm not losing concepts really. So.
All right. Well, in any case, I'll try to spit slower in order to help mitigate that as much as I can. Okay, so you're welcome. All right. So the crown chakra will be like the advisor. The advisor is the one who obviously advises the other members of the mastermind in many different regards, such as decisions made will affect the group and other groups or the organization of society as a whole, as well as help members overcome personal issues, kind of like as a counselor or a therapist. The third eye chakra represents the strategist. This is the one who goals to be met and creates a strategy for achieving them. The throat chakra represents the operator. The operator who manages all the communications, including the operations of meetings. They also help in the management of work to be done in the holosphere. In the old paradigm way of doing business with hierarchy, you have like the manager who basically takes over most, if not all, of these roles. These roles are now being divided so that everyone's kind of taking on some managerial responsibility. With the heart chakra, also known as the heart, as the central administrator would, normally be in the old paradigm, such as, the manager, the supervisor, something along that nature. Their primary goal is now to represent their group in their outer holosphere. I'm going to tell you what I mean by outer holosphere versus inner holosphere. I'm going to go back a few slides for that so it makes sense. So for this guy here, this is his inner holosphere because they're too, right? People are around him in this holosphere. This is his outer holosphere because in this holosphere, he's one who orbits around other. So that's what I mean by inner and outer holosphere. Okay, so while the heart chakra's main responsibility now is to represent that group in their outer holosphere, the throat chakra kind of takes on certain like more managerial responsibilities here, make as an operator, right? He wants to make sure that the operations are going smoothly, essentially. Wants to make sure that everybody has what they need when they need it, so that everybody can do what they need to do. Wants to make sure that, the strategy, the goals to be met are being met on time, and if not, try and help those people to get things done so that things can keep moving forward, right? So moving, there's solar plexus chakra, which is mediator, right? The mediator is who people resolve disputes when they're not successful in resolving those disputes between themselves, right? Obviously, we want to keep everything as private as possible. For those who are familiar with sovereignty and private equity law and things like that, privacy is a very big thing, especially when it comes to such things as legal disputes, right? So the first order of business is to always try and dispute privately between the individuals involved. And if they can't, well, then they get their mediator involved in order to, to help arbitrate the proceedings. And if that doesn't work, then, it goes to a kind of trial by jury kind of a thing, right? But always trying to keep things as private as possible the whole way through. So then we have the sacral chakra, which represents resource management, right? So the resource manager is the one who manages all of the resources of their holosphere in order to ensure that everything one needs is available so that they can do what they need to do, right? So this is like inventory management, maybe managing the schedule, things of that nature, right? But also these involve managing people, right? It's managing operations, managing resources, managing schedule, but never managing people, because people manage themselves, right? That's the way it's supposed to be. Finally, the root chakra, I have arbitrarily termed angel. I don't know what else to call it, but it works for me. These are the ones who do the actual work that needs to be done at home, right? Now, everybody except the heart chakra is going to be an angel in their outer mastermind, their outer holosphere. And the reason the heart chakra is not an angel is because they're the heart chakra in their inner holosphere. They're an angel chakra in their outer holosphere. So they can't possibly be an angel chakra in their inner holosphere. But, essentially everybody's an angel. Everybody has certain responsibilities that have to be met. And, various people take on these extra managerial responsibilities as well, just to evenly and equally distribute power, authority, and managerial responsibility, as well as, creating the holographic mastermind in order to increase the efficiency and overall effectiveness of the organization. So here are some of the benefits of a holographic medicine. It gives everyone a small, equal amount of managerial responsibility in the business organization, which provides the following benefits, right? It makes everyone feel more important and therefore more engaged and more involved. It is everyone to develop a sense of inner self-management in response to the outer responsibilities of management, right? Because if they're more involved in management to begin with, then they're going to have more of a sense of self-management in the first place. It capitalizes on the mastermind principle, creating a collective intelligence that far outweighs the sum of its parts. It evenly distributes responsibility and thus accountability throughout the organization, fostering a sense of teamwork and collaboration. It eliminates the need for top-down hierarchical management, thereby enabling a true democracy. I have to explain what I mean by that, in which everyone's voice may contribute to the overall decisions that need to be made. Now, what do I mean by true democracy? A lot of people think that the United States of America is a democracy. It's actually not. It's an oligarchy, right? True democracy is where the people rule themselves and they kind of collectively rule society in so much that everyone votes not only for who public servant, but they vote on every decision that directly affects them. And the public servants are not allowed to make decisions for the people, but rather they can only enact the decisions made by the people. Okay, that's what a true democracy is. That's the legitimate definition of a democracy. But most people don't understand that, is why I invented the term metatocracy, right? Because people will see the term metatocracy and then they'll have to question, well, what does that mean? And then they'll read the definition and now they'll know. But ultimately, it's actually just a true democracy. In any case, moving on. Includes its own system of dispute resolution. It includes its own system of checks and balances, which we'll be going over later. And finally, well, that's actually not final. There's a slew of more benefits. I'm going to call it even here. It educates people on how to properly behave as sovereigns and respect freedom and equality. Expanding to a society, part 1. So this is, I guess, part 2 of this presentation. Before we move on from that, does anybody have any questions about the metatocracy, about the information that we've already gone over? Okay, I'm going to take the silence as a no and move on. All right, so what is a society if not a network of people? How do these networks form? First, through families, second, through businesses and organizations, then through cities and other local communities, and it expands from there. I'm pretty sure we all understand that basic principle. What is the function of society? This is the important part. It's people or families and their businesses serving their community with the production of goods and services, right? It is not a government that lords over society, creating arbitrary rules that other people have to follow. It is the function of society is the production of goods and services for the benefit of society, the actual function of society. So the families and businesses that currently exist and will be created in the future should be that which forms the social administration of our society. It should not be governments that exist as a separate entity from the functions of society, right? Government as it currently exists is like a parasitic over society, if you will. It's a society on top of society that's completely and totally removed from actual society. But they have this insane idea that for some reason they have the ability to rule over that society, when in fact they actually don't, right? I mean, well, technically speaking, they do, because they do have the consent of certain people, but they certainly do not have consent of all of the people. The central heart and managers of each business or family, if the family operates as a business, would act as a representative on one of the layers of the councils that we'll be talking about soon, depending on the size and scale of their business, and the size of their business and the scale of community they serve, right? So, some businesses are pretty small. They only serve their hometown, their home, county. Some serve an entire state, some serve on a national level, some serve on an international level, right? So there's different layers of councils, and the size of your business determines, which councils you end up serving on if you serve on location-based councils. And we'll come around to what I mean by that later. The councils would be organized in the same fashion as businesses, which is with the metatocracy, right? Actually, forget this picture because it's outdated. There's going to be a later one that I'll go over. Moving on. So this is the organization of the councils. You notice now there's 13 of these instead of 6, right? So the councils are to be organized where there are 7 departments across 13 sectors of social administration. These are the 13 sectors. Each business would participate in the sector that most closely matches the type of products or services that they provide, right? Now, we, the core foundational members and myself discussed this and decided on the 13 sectors being directly related to the 11 different physiological systems of a biological body and the 2 spiritual systems, right? Plus the 2 spiritual systems. Now, we're not going to actually call these different 13 sections by this, but this is just like an FYI. This is how we figured for the organization of society. Because if you think about it, society is an organism of itself, just like our body is made of, organs, which are made of cells, which many of them are their own living organisms, right? Reality itself being organized in a sense of organisms within organisms within organisms, right? Which is why organ, organism, and organization all share the same root word, right? This is why we decided upon this form of organization, right? So the renal system, which relates to environmental protection, recycling, things of that nature. The skeletal system, which relates to construction and infrastructure. The integumentary or skin system, which relates to media, arts, and entertainment. You don't have to worry about the reasoning behind all this because, again, we're not going to actually call them this. It's just how we figured the organization. The reproductive system relates to education, mystery schools, or what we call gardens. The Nadi system, which is a Hindu term for one of the spiritual systems, relates to spiritual research and development. So this is where organizations like churches or temples, things of that nature, would fit into the sectoral organization. Chakra system, the other spiritual system, therefore relates to science, space, and tech research and development. Then you have the nervous system, which relates to advisory, strategy, planning, and I believe this also relates to like advertising, marketing, things of that nature. Musculatory system relates to like our defense system, so our peacekeepers, our Guardian Alliance. And I'm going to talk about that for a minute because we don't have like a military, so to speak, in our society. We believe in nonviolence as, a core principle here. So we don't want our defense to be trained in weapons of mass destruction, for example, but rather weapons of mass creation, right? Naturally, they will be trained in, the art of self-defense, personal self-defense, but rather than training in weapons, we'll be training in, like meditation, prayer, things of that nature, anchoring in these higher frequencies, upgrading the collective consciousness of not only our own people, our own members of our society, but the entire world, right? Which, if you think about it, is actually the ultimate form of defense. It's the ultimate form of preventing things from happening, right? So you don't even have to defend. Moving on, you have the immune system, which relates to our judicial system, our courts and legal system. The digestive system, therefore, relates to resource management, treasury, finance, things of that nature. Respiratory system relates to energy and communications. Endocrine system relates to health and wellness. And the circulatory system is the central processor, right? So there's really actually like 12 sectors, and then the central heart of each of these sectors participates in this central sector here is one of the ways in which you have transparency and communication throughout all the other 12 sectors, right? And actually, furthermore, each one of these, you see they got these different colors again. These are the mastermind roles of people in various positions or roles rather throughout these sectors. Well, not only do, like, for example, the hearts of each of these sectors get together in the central processor, but they also get together amongst themselves in the different departments of the council, right? So again, there's 7 departments and 13 sectors, right? 7 departments within 13 sectors. So these 7 departments are how we maintain continuous transparency and communication between all 13 of these sectors. So they get together, at different times, essentially. They get together as sectors and they get together as departments.
I have a question real quick.
Sure.
So in one of the previous slides, which you may be getting to explaining, there was this like sort of nice little thing where in the center circle, if you were on the outer ring of that circle, then you would become like the center of one of the, like the second ring of circles. But if you go back to the 13 ones, I'm just wondering how that like sort of fractal design will continue out. I'm not sure if I've explained it in a good enough way or.
I think you're referring to the inner versus outer holosphere / mastermind. So you're talking about how like this guy's central in this holosphere and has people orbiting around him.
Yeah.
He's also here in orbiting around in this holosphere here, right? So this is his inner holosphere. This is his outer holosphere, right?
Yeah, that's kind of it. And then, but then if there were like those, I guess 6 more on the outside of it, like how would that diagram fill out in that way?
So this would be, again, the same thing going on here where this is his inner holosphere, this is his outer holosphere, right? And so that then zooms out into this, right? So this here is the same as this here, right? And now there's these holospheres which orbit around this, right? So this guy is central to this. So this is his inner holosphere. And then each of these guys orbiting around him zoom out to these here, right? So now this guy, which is this guy, this is now his inner holosphere. This is his outer holosphere. And he has these moons orbiting around him. So you notice this guy is central to this entire holosphere here, right? So, his influence stems throughout this entire, let's call this a department, right? His influence, he influences this entire department, but you notice this blue color that's going around this entire department doesn't actually infiltrate these other holospheres, right? Because this is now his holosphere where he has influence, and this is now his holosphere where he has influence, and her holosphere where she has influence, and so on and so forth, right? So that's one of those separations of powers that I was talking about before.
Yes.
So this is how it keeps fractaling out.
Kamiron, let me help clarify. This, what you just explained, is helpful, but the question is directly related to the societal organization, where instead of 7, there's 13 departments.
Yeah.
But there's only 7. There's only 7 roles, right, for each holosphere.
Right. So there's 7 roles, but let's just imagine, 100 years from now, we have a lot of people. So there's more than 7 people in each of these sectors, right? More than first of all, each. Let's say this is losing my mind here. Let's say this is a council organization for a meta city, right? And I'm going to talk about what a meta city is later on. And within that meta city, you know, are many what we call UFOs, or unified fractal organisms, which is basically a word for businesses or organizations, right? And they all fall within one of these 13 sectors, or actually one of these 12 sectors, right? So each of these people are, like, you know, in old paradigm terminology, one of the owners of those businesses, right? Who are participating on this council within their various sectors, right? So in this, there's less of an inner outer paradigm for, like, the holospheres, right? Because the businesses that operate in this sector, you know, like, this isn't a zoomed in version of this, zoomed in version of this, right? These are all separate sectors. You could think of them as separate councils within the council, right? So we don't have that same inner outer paradigm going on in these, like you do in the actual business itself, right? Am I getting closer to answering your question now?
Yeah, I think that pretty much answers it.
Okay.
If there's sort of no inner outer thing, or at least not as
right, not on the councils. In the council,
Yep.
like, there's inner, like, councils do end up fractaling, right? So there is an inner outer to the councils overall over the grand scheme of things. But for this one council here, for example, none of these sectors are inner outer relationships with themselves, right? But for example, this core heart chakra of this council here is going to represent this council on the next council outward in society, right? So then you get that inner outer thing going on between councils, but in this council itself, there's no inner outer relationship going on here.
And then I was also going to say, Kamiron, there is kind of an inner outer relationship between the businesses that are, you know, the business leaders that are representing their businesses in the council organization itself, right? So there's kind of different relationships, right? So you have the individual businesses that then send representatives to the council, and then you have the council that then sends representatives to the larger governing council as well.
Correct. Yeah. So the organizations themselves would be the inner, and the council would be the outer, right, for example. Okay.
So Kamiron, I think we'll do about 10 more minutes, or we can end here if it's a good stopping point, depending on what you're.
Yeah. Let's make this the last slide then, and then we'll move on from there. Or actually, hold on. We'll make this next slide the slide, and then we'll move on to question and answers. So there's 7 total layers of councils. Well, technically, 7 total layers of society, actually, as it is. And that's because there's 7 layers to the universe, 7 layers to the organism, which is a universe within a universe, 7 chakras, 7 seas, 7 continents, right? The number 7 abounds throughout nature. So the first layer of society is obviously the individual, right? The sovereign diplomat. The next layer up from there is the UFOs, the unified fractal organisms, which are the businesses and organizations. Next layer up from there are the meta cities, which are city or town sized local areas. And then from there, it's meta nations, which are state province sized areas, or otherwise religious and cultural networks. And we'll get into that in the next presentation, what I mean between the difference of that. Out from there is the bioregion councils, which are nation sized areas. And then out from there are the Biosphere Councils. Now, as we grow, these are going to evolve, right? So when we have enough people, we'll start with, you know, the east-west hemispheres of the planet. And then when we have enough people and we need to split that again, we'll go to the 4 quadrants of the globe. And when we have enough people and we need to split that again, they'll become like the 7 continents. And then finally, you have the 7th layer of society, which is the International Council of Light, right? That's the global council, right? And so last slide for this presentation, expanding to a society part 2. businesses themselves are not the only entities that can join MetaGaius. There are many different types of spiritual communities being created today, such as Modern Masters, Michael Tellinger's Ubuntu movement, Helix, the Together Life Systems, the Tribe of Awakening Sovereignty, Oroville, and many, many, many others. I obviously can't list them all. It'll go on forever. Just like an international business could be seen as a network of organizations, a spiritual community could also be seen in the same way, right? You recall earlier I talked about here, I guess it's in this presentation. So you have location-based and network-based metanation councils, right? This is where this comes into play. You know, those that don't necessarily subscribe to a very specific religion or culture or spirituality will probably be very comfortable just organizing on the location-based networks. And then there are those that are very specific to their beliefs, their culture, you know, their religion. And so they can create kind of their own metanation, as it were, as, you know, basically their own network of people. That way we're inclusive to everyone, right? Because we want to be inclusive to as many people as we can, so long as they are in alignment with our core principles, which were discussed in the first presentation. Now, as such, MetaGaius aims to be like an umbrella, for lack of a better term, for all different spiritual communities and business organizations alike who are interested in co-creating the transcendental world of the new age, golden age of enlightenment. Due to this, there are essentially two different ways in which such organizations and communities can join MetaGaius. Again, that's location-based and network-based, right? So UFOs who do not adhere to any specific spiritual cultural beliefs would be location-based, and spiritual communities or organizations / networks that are not specific to a location, but are all over the world or nation and would rather be specific to their spiritual cultural beliefs can create their own metanation network. And that is where we will end this presentation for today. Why is my escape button not working? There we go, end show.
I have a quick question on that last slide. So there was said two ways to join MetaGaies, and the one way was location-based, but it said for those that do not adhere to any specific spiritual or cultural beliefs. So is that because you're considering a spiritual community that did adhere to specific spiritual or cultural beliefs as not joining MetaGaius, but being their own sort of sovereign entity? I'm just...
So there's kind of two ways that could go, right? So for example, you have various Christian churches, which are all over the world, right? As long as they are in alignment with our core principle, they're free to join, right? But, you know, someone like that may not, you know, groups like that, I should say, may not want to join based on their location, right? So they might exist within a certain meta city or meta nation, but, you know, they want to follow their own rules, their own, you know, governing structure, as it will. They want to have their own administration for their own policies, as it were, right? So they can create their own meta nation for their network of churches, right? As one example. And then as another example, you know, you have, let's say for, you know, like over in India, you know, everybody there is basically part of the, you know, Hindu culture, right? So, you know, most of the people there are already part of that culture. So they're just going to participate with that local culture and go with that location-based meta-nation, meta-city councils, right? But for those Hindus who are all over the world in other countries, right, maybe they don't want to participate on, you know, a meta-nation or meta-cities council in the United States because they would rather adhere to rules and principles and policies that are in alignment with their Hindu culture. So they would create, you know, a Hindu culture meta-nation for those Indian people who are around the world rather than in India, you know, kind of like that sort of a thing.
Sounds good.
Cool. Any other questions?
Yeah, Cameron, I'll jump in with one. You mentioned it in other places, but you haven't covered it so far in the presentations thus far. Specifically about how your system, in like by its nature, is antagonistic towards kind of corruption. Can you speak a little bit about how the system itself protects against kind of people gaining too much power and becoming corrupt in certain ways?
That is an excellent question. Thank you for asking. So yeah, it's been designed overall to. I'd like to say it's an incorruptible system that remains yet to be tested, of course. But so there's several things in play that overall help it to at least prevent the ability of corruption from happening, at least from the onset, barring any changes that are made over time. So among those are obviously, first and foremost, we have, the decentralization of management, right? So remember, actually, I'm going to go back into a screen share here and go to a specific slide to help answer that question, which is here. Okay, so as I said earlier, in the metatocracy, people not only vote for who becomes a representative on the council, but also on every administrative issue that directly affects them. And the representatives cannot make decisions for the people, but can only enact decisions made by the people, although anybody can put forth a proposal. So that's kind of first and foremost, that's probably the foundational concept of how we prevent corruption, right? Corruption happens so easily now because the people we elect to positions of so-called power, they don't have to listen to us once they're elected, right? They just make whatever decisions they want to make. If there are votes on any administrative issues whatsoever, it's only within the Congress itself. It doesn't include the people, right? So you're talking about the wealthiest people in the United States are the ones who are making all the decisions for everybody. And they also like to think of themselves as the most intelligent people. They're really not. And I'm sure we all know that. So everybody participates in every decision that directly affects them, right? So it's this overall decentralization of power and authority that's going on in that sense, right? In this way, all individuals are equal unto each other, and the collective is equal unto all individuals, right? So we're not individualist, we're not collectivist, we're the balance between the two. Neither is superior to the other, neither rules over the other. Individuals rule over themselves and collectively participate in the administration of their community. The only way to pass a vote in the metatocracy is with what we call an overwhelming majority, right? Which is defined as 61.8% or greater. The reason for that, some of you might be familiar with this number, 1.618. It's the proportion phi, right? Which can be seen all throughout nature. Everything in nature is organized according to the proportion phi, right? Essentially speaking, if I were to put this into a philosophical concept, any species that wants to undergo evolution within its genome, for example, like 61.8% of that species, at the very least, would have to be in agreement with this change in order for it to actually take place, because this percentage is where you get what's called coherence, right? Coherence means that you have not full 100% agreement. It's not exactly necessary, but you have enough agreement of the whole, right, that you actually achieve harmony and balance on that decision, right? There's enough agreement in the term of magnetics. Enough of a mass is oriented north-south in a certain direction, in so much that it creates the magnetic field, right? That's what coherence would mean, right? So that's the reason for that specific number there, 61.8% or greater in order to pass a vote. All decisions can be made at the layer of council or holosphere to which they affect, not requiring every decision to go all the way out to the International Council of Light or all the way to the, center of the business, or top of the business in the old paradigm, so long as no decision negates any of the policies in the Council of Light. And so obviously, we want everybody to have the freedom to create their own policies within their own bioregions, metanations, metacities, UFOs, holospheres, et cetera, et cetera. But obviously, we can't allow them to negate or be at odds with any policies on any of the holospheres that are outside of them, right? Everything's got to be in alignment. But to that effect, you have the freedom to incorporate rules that are part of your own culture, your own spiritual beliefs, your own whatever the case may be. Whenever a council within create a policy contradicts one or more policies in the Council of Light or any other council within it, because we know that's happen sometimes, first, it must be considered whether or not the policy or policies being contradicted are outdated, limiting the free will or sovereignty of the people, or are misinterpretations of natural law. If so, then these policies, the ones being contradicted, need to be updated with the consent of the overwhelming majority of the population in question, so groups within it will no longer be in conflict with their outer or their inner or whatever, their inner holosphere, actually, that's a typo, or council. If not, right, if these are not limiting to the free will or being misinterpretations of natural law, then the holosphere in question must update their policy to no longer be in conflict with the outer holosphere. So in other words, our policies are not meant to replace our humanity, right? That's very important. Policies are for organization and procedural purposes, right? If ever we discover that our policies, like strict adherence to our policies, is negating our humanity, then it's time for them to be updated and changed. So yeah, so that's the answer I have for your question.
Thank you.
Next question. Anybody? Bueller? Okay.
May I just speak for a moment? Okay, thank you. I just wish to, let's say, elaborate here and comment on how I am seeing this overall project be a definite part of the infrastructure of what we are doing. And what I am representing is, yes, you can say it is the Council of Light segment to oversee what is occurring upon the planet. With this project, the more in-depth mechanics of how it will work to transition society. So what I wish to say, I'm very appreciative of the extensive work that all has put into this project here, but I also see it in alignment with what we are currently doing. And what we are currently just doing with GPMS is collecting the worldwide consent in one place. And we are going to activate the money for this system from the intrinsic value of each. And having said this, you know, this would be your overall money supply for the system, what we are doing, and also the sovereignty, the natural law, the, you know, the unalienable rights fully introduced. So I am seeing fully how these two things, if you will, fit together with what we're doing. And with GPMS, what we were doing, we did not define it and take it like you have here. So I'm saying this is the mechanics on the micro, not the micro, but, you know, on that level to make everything work. So having said this, I requested to, you know, have a meeting that we could speak more on this in the future.
Absolutely.
One of the things, with the rapidity of the everything moving forward, is that we are obliterating, if you will, the darkness and the corruption. So there are many questions that we know that will come up now that are irrelevant to the future, for we have all of the solutions upon the planet, and we have all these templates, and we are in this time of bringing everything to work. So all of the pieces are already here, and very rapidly, as a result of, the last 2 years, it's all being set up for what we are all doing. And it has to be the unity to bring it all together. And so, having said that, I'm very impressed, with the presentation, with the work that you have done, and I see how it's in complete alignment with what we have been working upon to collect the voice. And essentially, what we do with GPMS is to collect the majority voice worldwide, and this majority voice takes the rightful ownership of all of the existing infrastructure upon the planet, because technically we are all shareholders of everything ever built, and we are turning it, all to the good for everyone. So I don't wish to, impose with what we're doing, because we'll speak about that later, but I just wish to express my appreciation of this project. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Rick, for sharing that. And yeah, we're very grateful for Cameron, and also recognize the great work and very in-depth work that he's done. Elle, you have a question? Lorelei. You're muted.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I've just been really intrigued watching this because what I've been observing for the last 20 years is an emergence of a movement of movements. And so I have an 11-page document that I've created of 200 movements that meet the criteria that I've seen, the patterns that I've seen. So I started out like 20 years ago, very similar. I did a number of years work in the book, The Turning Point by Fitz-Jeff Capra. And his book he said, we're moving from a reductionist orientation in our society to systems-based orientation. And that was just completely in sync with all of my work. But at that time, 20 years ago, we just had the one criteria. Now I've got about 13 different criteria from the, so there's a quote that says, we are living in a chink of time when the old order has crumbled and the new one is not yet cemented. And so I identified the order that's crumbling, the characteristics of those, and the order that is emerging. And so it sounds like you have designed a new structure. And what I've been watching is the emergence, I would call it quantum emergence, of a structure that's based on the networking principle. Starting out, there was a big movement in 2010, 2011, where a whole lot of people left their 9-to-5 jobs and started to do entrepreneurs. And then that went into partnerships. And then those people started developing a knowledge base that other people could get their knowledge. And then they started doing networks, and now I'm seeing networks and networks. So there's just sort of pivot points, which I think have astrological influence as well as to how this has come about like this. So I'm starting to see some interface between what I've watched emerge and the patterns and the kind of organizational structure that you're talking about. I see it that there's a lot of, I think that maybe my observations are preliminary to the creation of the organizational structure that you're talking about. And the one thing I would say that I think is really important to present to the public is an understanding of electric universe principles, as opposed to Newtonian. We still have a science that's based on Newtonian principles, and I like the electric universe principles better than quantum. I think the quantum has got some problems with it. So that's basically, and I just think that once people understand electric universe principles, it opens the door to all new kinds of technologies that are already existing, but they're just not, we just don't know about them because
Right. Yeah.
depressed, all that kind of stuff. So anyway, I would like to send you my stuff because I think that there's quite a lot of interface, but like what I've been watching is kind of like the growing of an organism over the last 20 years. Yeah.
Well, I would greatly appreciate that. I put my email address in the chat for anybody who wants to connect with me further, send me information, or set up another time to with me, or whatever the case may be. Just hit me up at that email address and we'll talk further.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Yeah. I'd like to share a little bit about kind of what we see as our role in this as well. And, we're just getting started in terms of building our mentor network and our collaborative community. And so this is going to evolve as many things do, of course. But at this time, what we like to provide, we're very technically minded. We're very security and privacy conscious. And so some of the systems that we've created are built in such a way that we can facilitate these group meetings or collaborations in a way that doesn't involve big technology. So we've set up a private Kanban board for Kamiron's project that you can be invited to. We've set up private chat rooms that he has access to. And so as his group grows in terms of the people that want to collaborate on this alternative society development, we see our roles as facilitators to make it so you guys don't have to worry about setting up private secure technologies to assist you. We can handle that role in terms of giving you the ability to work freely and safely without having to worry about those things.
Well, I really appreciate that because I can no longer post on YouTube.
Right. Many can't.
I'm surprised I still can.
So yeah, I think as Kamiron's project evolves and as it grows with more people, we'll be growing with you guys to ensure that we can facilitate everything that needs to be done. And so I think the next kind of step might be to get a few people that are interested in working together with Kamiron and with us, and even maybe set up a kind of logistical meeting to get people with the tools that they need to communicate and collaborate effectively. And so the best way to do that, what do you think would be a kind of next step for people to maybe set up a kind of a small email list with just the group to get started?
Yeah, that would be good. Or Kamiron, you can also kind of lead the charge if you want to use the Kanban board, depending on what's next as far as tasks or collaboration.